That was when the Office of Medical Humanities first opened. It was a one-of-a-kind program, and in 1995, with a grant from the Culpeper Foundation, Drs. Bill and Marjorie Sirridge moved forward their plan to develop an undergraduate medical humanities curriculum at UMKC. It was renamed the Office of Medical Humanities and Bioethics in 2008. The mission of integrating the arts, humanities, and bioethics into the study and practice of medicine was woven through our 6-year curriculum. And the first endowed professor in medical humanities and bioethics was appointed that year. This endowment is a testimony to the value of having a personal mission and vision, Drs. Bill and Marjorie. Their vision focused on what you're passionate about. Both of the Dr. Sirridge had that passion and a vision for weaving the humanities into medical education, and both were trailblazers and advocates. Their vision benefited not only their patients, but also allowed them to be effective mentors and to serve as role models, which they were. They were the heart of this School of Medicine in its early days, and they left a lasting legacy. It's our honor to recognize the dedication and compassion and promise to patient care and medical education with this William and Marjorie Sirridge Lecture. Today's speaker, Dr. Benjamin Gilmer, is a graduate of Davidson College in North Carolina and also the Brody School of Medicine at East Carolina University in the class of 2006, right, Ben? He's a board-certified family physician and associate professor at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine, Mountain Area Health Education Center, or MAHEC, as you may see abbreviated. He also directs the family medicine residency program in Asheville and is the medical director of the Kenan Primary Care Medical Scholars, where he advocates for global and rural health disparities, while himself advancing medical education through students and the family medicine clerkship and directing the UNC School of Medicine Asheville campus of the MAHEC Family Medicine program. He serves on the board, interesting pearl, on the board of the Albert Schweitzer Fellowship, a name that most physicians should be familiar with, historical figure who also left a lasting impression. Dr. Ben's committed to using the story of the other Dr. Gilmer, as you may see in this book, which he authored, and we have a few copies available in the Department of Humanities office. And speaking about the other Dr. Gilmer, whose name is Vince, and his own shift to our beliefs about how we perceive the intersection of punishment, that is through the penal system, and mental illness. As a medical director, writer, and advocate, Benjamin believes that changing our system of mass incarceration requires upstream change, starting with education and a deeper understanding of the fallibility of the human brain. His mission is to inspire conversations that examine our stories of self, our biases, and a life of advocacy. Ben, it's a pleasure to have you here, and we look forward to hearing your talk, Relational Leadership and Media, using our stories of self, us, and now for advocacy.
Can you hear me? It's hard for me to sit behind a podium, so I'm a walker. Thanks for having me today. Thank you, Dr. Carter, for inviting me. I knew it was Dr. Carter when he showed up to pick me up at the hotel last night, because on the front of his car there was a plaque that said ethics. I'd never seen that before in my life. It was great to meet the Sirridge family and have dinner last night. Thank you for this legacy of the human factor, I thought I would just read a little piece rather than read my book. That was more inspired by this piece that was written in 2001, so I thought I'd just read a little excerpt from it. Are there people out there?
There are people on Zoom. Thank you. I forgot to mention that.
So this was written by Darcy Graves back in 2001, a long time ago. As individuals, we are the culmination of all of our life experiences. We each have our own path, our own baggage, and our own history to tell. Patients come to you with a story of their own, a complete spectrum of experiences that you may or may not ever be able to comprehend. The illness or injury that they are currently experiencing is only one spot on that spectrum, one aspect of a very rich life. It is for this reason we study the humanities in medical schools. The literature, the plays, the paintings, and the music allow us to vicariously experience so much more than everyday life ever could. As physicians, you are going to have remarkable careers, touch so many lives, and hopefully leave the world better for having practiced medicine. One way to ensure that you will be able to fulfill these promises is to understand experiences beyond your own. It is this knowledge that will allow you to connect to your patient so that you may make the most of your medical expertise. For the healing process involves taking into account not only a patient's diagnosis, but also that individual's story. So great, huh? So beautiful. So pertinent. So we're going to talk about story today. We're going to tell some stories, and if you can cut me off at least 10 minutes before, so we can share and have a conversation, because that's always more fun. And I'm a little long-winded sometimes. So we're going to here's some objectives. I've been obsessed lately about relational leadership. Have you ever heard of the concept of relational leadership? Marshall Gans at Harvard kind of pioneered like the story of self, us, and now years ago. So there's a whole like curriculum designed around relational leadership. So I'm going to try to infuse some of that as we go, and we'll talk about a real story of self, my own, and then think about the pathway that can take us from our story of self to our current story of now. So to whom do we tell stories? Who are the people we share our stories with? Who are the people we listen to the most? This is the open style.
Friends.
I'm sorry?
Friends.
Family.
Ourselves.
Ourselves. Yeah, anybody touch yourselves? I do, pathologically. Who else do we share stories? Students. Yes, we are professional teachers. Yep. Who else?
Children.
They don't always listen, but it's another story.
People in the workplace.
Strangers in the elevator.
Strangers in the elevator. Thank you. Who else? Dr. Sirridge in the back is a storyteller.
I tell most of my stories to my patients because it's maybe their story.
So we tell stories to all people, right? All humans, even our adversaries. We tell stories for ourselves. I love that. Yesterday, I was trying to tell a story to our senator to try to enact some change in our region. Don't know if he listened, but I think it's important to recognize like why we, the collective, we in this room are sort of naturally fit for being recipients of stories or telling stories. I mean, it's kind of what medical education is, right? That's what we do. We listen to stories, we communicate through story all the time, and we have special skills. Like we are directly connected with the community. We are adaptive people naturally. We're hopefully socially aware, and hopefully, thanks to the humanities department, which is very unique. You all know that like most places don't have a human factor. Like this is a special opportunity to learn how to speak authentically, to be vulnerable, etc. So I think we're fit for this by our very nature, and there's so much benefit like to telling stories. So much. I mean, naturally it makes us more curious people. Inspires sharing, community, all this stuff. And bridges differences of opinion. So I'm going to tell a couple stories this morning. This was a story that was in the New York Times this morning, actually. A picture of our community that's been ravaged. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and our community has been ravaged by the storm. And so this has been our story of now, recently. This is a house right down the street from mine. I never noticed this character who lived in this house ever before. I drive by this house every day. But the day after the storm, we had to rescue him from his roof with an electric extension cable. And so it naturally made me more curious about who this man was. Why didn't he leave? And there's a deeper story there. The storm has been an opportunity to reflect on our shared values, our ideas, and this is right down the street from my house too, where the river flows. This is down by our workplace, and it's been very therapeutic, to share stories. I think anytime we share a story, whether that be with your mother or with your patient, there's bidirectional therapy that happens, both when you listen actively and when you share actively. So we've been telling lots of stories late. This was a day of storytelling, trying to bridge some differences of opinion. This was Mike Johnson, who came to a clinic that I set up after the storm. And we were telling lots of stories in this moment because we needed so much help. And so we had to make our stories succinct and potent to try to recruit aid because we incurred $60 billion of damage in our community. Stories and gender community, this is part of our team. After the storm, we had a therapy dog that joined us for the weeks that we were doing this work together. But I think everyone knows that the stories we tell are a deep part of our community. I had a breakfast yesterday morning with the head of our Cherokee Indian Health System Hospital. They have a whole curriculum designed around story called the Right Way, where they infuse their legacy of Cherokee stories as part of their curriculum for all their employees, for their doctors, for their nurses, for their administrators, for the C-suite. They all learn to practice the stories that have been so key to their culture. So story, I think, is an opportunity just to pause for a moment and think about your own story. Because in medicine, and we heard this last night, there is such a divide oftentimes between the person that we have to be as physicians, the work required to be a student or a resident, and we often get distracted from our own story or the flow of our own story. So think for a moment, what is your story? What are you trying to grow into? What have you been called to? What are the stories that you want others to hear or be inspired by? What is the thread of your personal story? And what does that mean in terms of how you express your stories to others and the values that you may implicitly or not express? So just take a moment and think about the story in your minds. This will be a great moment for a breakout session, but we don't have an hour and a half. What are the stories of yourself that you're trying to either better understand or express to others? This is what I've been thinking a lot about personally. So when you tell a story about yourself, it's an active process. It's an iterative process. It's something that provokes you to think. And every time I tell a story, and I've told this story many times, there's always something different that comes about. I always learn something about it, or I learn something from you that provokes a thought that was, that I never imagined before. So I'm going to practice the story of self. And your homework tonight is to go home and practice telling your personal story of self. It could be anyone. You can call your mom, you can tell your girlfriend or your boyfriend, your spouse. Reflect on what your story is for a moment, because it's hard. So my story starts back in 2001 with a physician named Vince Gilmer, who was a primary care physician who decided, after going to a rural residency track program, that he was going to pursue his mission and he was going to practice rural medicine in North Carolina, where he had developed a relationship with a very small community outside of Asheville. And he did it. He graduated. It was an arduous journey for him. He didn't pass his boards during residency. He actually had to take a year off from residency, and he delivered pizza during that year. Finally graduated, and he arrived to this community, which was called King Creek. And that's where he started his career. On July 10th in 2003, he finally had to face the family medicine boards. And so he was driving to take his board exam. And on that day, he flipped his car. It was a truck. He flipped his truck. He hit a telephone pole. He was found to be unconscious. And he was taken to Mission Memorial Hospital, where he had a CT and couldn't remember his name. So he had some brain damage at the time. He never made it to take his board exams. That same summer, just a month later, was my sort of baptismal moment in medicine during my third year. And I went to medical school exclusively to be an emergency medicine physician. And I had prepared my whole life story was telling me that I needed to do emergency medicine. And I was really disappointed when my first clinical rotation was not in the emergency department. It was in a rural psychiatric hospital. And so I went to this hospital, Broughton, and these were my first patients as a medical student. And so they were a young group of teenage adolescent girls mostly, and I learned to listen. My only job that summer was to listen to their stories. Like that was my active pursuit. And in the afternoons, I would walk around through the hospital, sometimes to the geriatric wards. And one afternoon, I met this elderly man who was sitting in a wheelchair, and he was not very communicative, but I introduced myself and just started talking to him. And he told me his name was Donald Gilmer. I was like, oh, my name's Gilmer. He didn't really have much to say. We didn't develop much of a relationship, but he was someone who had been residing in the hospital for a couple of years. The following summer, the same month nearly, Donald Gilmer, the patient that I met, was supposed to be picked up by his son, Vince Gilmer, who'd been practicing outside of Asheville. And Donald Gilmer never made it back to the assisted living facility where he was going. He disappeared. On that same day, I looked to see where I was, and this was my sort of second baptismal moment. I took a year off of medical school to work at the Albert Schweitzer Hospital in Gabon, West Africa, and my mentor at the time went on vacation for 2 months and left me all by myself. And I was running a rural pediatric clinics and learned a lot. It was a true baptism by fire. And that day, the day that Donald Gilmer went missing, I remember seeing over 100 patients on my own with a nurse. And it was a moment that I'll never, it was a day I'll never forget, for sure. The following day, a body was found across the border of North Carolina and Virginia. And Donald Gilmer lay in a ditch with a halo around his neck and with a corpse that was semi-mutilated. It didn't take long to discover who had done this. It was his son, Vince Gilmer, Dr. Vince Gilmer. Dr. Vince Gilmer was quickly arraigned after running from the law for a few days, after seeing patients, actually, for 3 days after this event. And no one thought anything unusual about him. He saw that the very next day 15 patients, and not one of them noticed anything curious about him. His trial was swift, and he was convicted of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. and went to Wallens Ridge Prison, which is one of the 2 supermax prisons in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And that's where he stayed. So you're probably wondering, what is the really, why is he telling me this murder story at lunch? So I finished residency, and I switched careers from emergency medicine after my experience in Gabon, after seeing what rural medicine was like, and decided to become a family doctor, and moved to Asheville, North Carolina, and that's where I started to inherit my first patients in a small building in a little place called King Creek. And that's when I started inheriting and realizing during my interview that I was following in the footsteps of another Dr. Gilmer, one that I had no concept or idea of. And in fact, they almost didn't give me the job because the board thought that it would be a little too risky to have another Dr. Gilmer. I didn't really care. I had young kids. I needed a job. I was eager to start work. And so I did. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the life of Albert Schweitzer. It's a generational test question. I wish we could spend time talking about Albert Schweitzer. He's one of my mentors, and he started the hospital in Africa where I worked. And he's a true artist of a physician, so he's very much embodied like the human factor. He was a musician, he was a philosopher, he was a theologian, he was a surgeon, he was a carpenter. He was pretty much everything. As close to a Renaissance human as you could find, literally, in our history. And this is one of the quotes that I love from him, that grow into your ideals before life robs you of them. And this was a really important message for him to hear, and one that I've really is close. So he had a philosophy called reverence for life. And so reverence for life was, for him, a distillation of a philosophy, a creed that really developed for himself, but he wanted others to have it too. And it was one that we could spend hours talking about, but it's a simple concept that you need to respect all others, humans, animals who are seeking to survive and who needs help, that it's our duty to revere them and to support them. So how many of you feel like you have a personal creed, a mantra that you play a lot in your minds that helps you to get through the day? Would you like to share, Dr. Carter?
No, nothing like being put on the spot. It's honesty, respect, integrity, and discipline. These are things that I learned from my father and rolled into a life of service and duty. I think about them every day as I think of him.
That's beautiful. So everybody has their inner workings, their inner mantra that you seek to adhere to. If you don't, it's like, this is a good time to think about it. Schweitzer thought that he thought that a lot of folks during his life at that time, that it was a dark period of history, and it was. He lived through the First World War, the Second World War. These were difficult times in Europe where he was from. There was a certain misery that was infused into the culture at the time, and he was very concerned about sort of the thoughtlessness, the lack of arts, the lack of humanities that were really an important part, not just of medicine, but an important part of humanity. So that was a big part of his gift. This is sort of the pathway or the mantra that I've been trying to, I didn't develop this, but it's something that sort of kept me straight as I've tried to piece together the importance of how the story, as it unfolds, affects me and how I want to be a part of it. And in a way, it's a nice pathway from understanding yourself through the first rung of the ladder, which is curiosity, and then arriving to change. Because this is every human's, every human has the desire at some point to impact the world. And that could be on a very personal level, it could be on a micro level, it could be on a regional level, whatever. But everyone deep inside has a reverence to want to engage and act and make change. And curiosity is so critical. It's so critical, especially when you think, and I love this image because it really, you can sort of think about like the rigors of medicine in the left hemisphere, and then the spatial, inspirational, artistic humanities of the right hemisphere. That, there's a lot of life psychology there, but there's also a lot of truth there. Because in medicine, and this is something I speak about all the time with my students, we become committed to the left hemisphere. Like, this is where we feel comfortable. Dr. Carter and his colleagues feel comfortable. Well, Dr. Carter's by hemisphere. He does both. But in the humanities really helps to inspire what happens in the right hemisphere. And you can't be a good doctor without having both. And curiosity creates a neurobiologic shift that enables you to have greater access into the right hemisphere of your brain. So I think there's an amazing book called The Divided Brain. It's about that thick, that tells the history of this, and it's really a beautiful story. So I started becoming very curious, and because I was hearing stories from all of my patients, and they wanted to tell me what they thought of the other Dr. Gilmer. And it was very uncomfortable. My first patient that I saw at the clinic, I provoked a panic attack in this woman because she had no idea which Dr. Gilmer was going to walk in the door. And it was a very strange way to start a career, like walking in the footsteps of a murderer with the same name and hearing all these stories. And at first I didn't really want to hear them. I just wanted to get on with my life. I was trying to be a first-year doctor, which is hard enough. I was a first-year parent, which is also hard enough. And they were telling me these things, and I started listening to them because most family medicine people are very curious. And so these were some of the things that I was hearing, that he was one of the kindest doctors that they had ever known, that he was completely normal before the murder, that he did sometimes seem a little impulsive, that he was such a great guy, that maybe he was going through a midlife crisis. Did act a little bit differently that winter, but was the most compassionate physician I had ever seen before. And so how do you take that in? On one end, I was hearing that he was a cold-blooded murderer, because that's what the judge described him as. And then all the people who knew him well, who had been listening and exchanging stories with this man, said the exact opposite. And it was even more curious because one patient early on said, there's a lot for you to learn from the other Dr. Gilmer. Like he listened to me. He gave me hugs. He gave all of his patients hugs. He went to my kids' t-ball games. He was that kind of real doctor. And so ultimately, curiosity, if you allow it to enter, leads to inquiry. And if you pursue inquiry intentionally, it will take you somewhere. Sometimes places you don't want to go. So if you look at what inquiry can do to you, this is our daily practice in medicine. This is what we do with every patient. Do you notice anything interesting about these words, this collage of words? Verbs. Yeah.
Question is biggest. Question.
The question is the biggest one? Yeah. Any one word resonate with you the most?
Wonder.
Wonder?
I like reflecting.
I'm sorry?
I like reflecting.
Reflecting? Mm-hmm.
Document.
Document? From the philosopher at the head of the table? That's interesting. Notice too that the words on the left are very left-brained. The words on the right are very right-brained also. And so I was very divided at the time. Like my brain struggled to make sense of what was the truth. Because my left brain was telling me very pragmatically that he was a cold-blooded murderer, and my right brain was telling me something very different. And so I started digging into details, and I read all 800 pages of the trial and realized that it was the most farcical legal trial. Well, it was the only legal trial I had ever read before, but it was the craziest trial I could imagine, because Dr. Gilmer fired his lawyer, represented himself, and presented himself as his own expert witness for his own murder trial. What is the craziest thing you could do before your own murder trial?
Go on the stand.
Go on the stand. And so it didn't make sense. But I think inquiry is very important because, well, especially in this age, right? Inquiry is very important. We see the loss of so many of these things because judgment becomes so easy rather than curiosity. Disagreement, so easy to gravitate towards instead of a shared exploration. Defensiveness rather than self-reflection. Assumptions rather than questions, etc. So inquiry I see it as sort of an antidote. So the inquiry that I needed to do at the time was to go meet this man. And so I did. So I went to Wallen Ridge. It was the first time this privileged white person had ever been to a prison before, and it was an experience that I'll never forget. It marked me that day. And what I witnessed was this. I witnessed a man that experienced all of these things. In my mind, I was expecting to see this monster. That was what I was preparing for. And I was confused by what filter I was going to see this man. I really didn't know. And this is what I saw. I saw a man who looked profoundly older, who fidgeted, who was anxious, who had a little shuffling gait when he came out, who had this ravenous appetite when I fed him Twinkies and snowballs that he consumed as fast as any human had eaten, I had witnessed. But at the same time, he was kind, gentle, and gracious. It was very confusing. And he sat down and he said, "Thank you for coming to see me." This was like a big moment for me. I mean, I was very nervous at the time, but it was a moment that was sort of unexpected, and that it began really an experience of transformation. Like it was maddening to see the prison, and then it was even more maddening to start realizing some of the statistics that I didn't know about. I didn't study these in medical school. That I didn't understand that 40, maybe even 50% of incarcerated people have severe mental illness, not just run-of-the-mill generalized anxiety disorder, but severe mental illness. That 10 times more people who suffer from severe mental illness, 10 times, live in prisons rather than all of the mental hospitals in the entire country. Like how do you even internalize that? That means the largest mental hospitals in our country, you know where they are? None of them are in Kansas City. Largest mental hospitals in our country are Rikers Island in New York. A lot of press about Rikers Island recently. This laid off 2,000 people, 2,000 employees. Cook County Jail in Chicago and the LA County Jail. Those are the 3 largest repositories of humans who suffer from mental illness in the world, of which 25% of incarcerated people, the world's incarcerated people, live in our country. But those are hard stats to take in, and I felt embarrassed that I had never discovered them personally. I'm going to kind of gloss over this. There was another transformational moment when I thought I had a theory of what happened to the other Dr. Gilmer, that there was a unifying diagnosis that explained what happened to him. And it turned out to be true. And that diagnosis proved why he did what he did. It proved why he represented himself pro se in trial. It proved why he was hearing voices. And it created a context for this horrific event that happened with his father. I'm not gonna share the details because that would sort of be a spoiler alert. But then after realizing this, I came to a point of like, what is my duty here? Like, what am I supposed to do? As a physician, as a human, I discovered that this was a very wrong thing that happened on multiple fronts. but that this man should, my predecessor, should not live in prison for his entire life. That he shouldn't have ever gone to prison in the first place. And so what is our role as physicians? Those of you who have taken the Hippocratic Oath, how many of you have taken the Hippocratic Oath? All of us, yeah. What are we supposed to do when we see something that's not right? And I was really struggling with this. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, but I knew that I was supposed to do something. And so I had been working with a journalist, Sarah Koenig from This American Life, and we decided to tell the story on the radio. I thought it would be interesting, and I thought it would be a way to talk about what had happened. But this was the first story that I've ever contributed in telling. And I had no idea that like 20 million people would listen to this story on the radio. That was like not even in my consciousness. But it was the first kind of step towards realizing that stories can have impact. And that was beginning to be true. And then when you think of your story of self, you have to reflect about how your story of self intersects with the stories of all of us in the room. So this is the collective experience. What are our shared values, our shared aspirations? What stories do we tell together? How do we unite our stories so that we can have a common story? How do we make our stories more impactful or more potent? If you don't think about the story of us, then stories can also just dissolve away. So a light bulb kind of went off in my head. I was like, wow, okay, let's see what we could do by telling this story. And so I became very motivated to get this man out of prison, and started telling stories all over the place. And in 2018, we submitted a clemency petition to the governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, and he waited and he waited and he waited until his very last day in office, and he said no. He rejected our clemency petition. He was a Democrat, and he said no. And I was very upset about this and didn't know what to do. I had assumed it would be easy to get this man out of prison, and it was not. And so at that point, I started on this mission to tell a larger story, one that had been percolating, and starting to discover this larger story of us, starting to discover people like Brian Stevenson, who, if you haven't read Just Mercy, that's a book that you should all read. So Brian became sort of a mentor to me in the earlier parts of like how to storytell, how to vision. I was like, vision? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Vision. And so I started learning from other people what visioning meant. And so visioning meant actually getting into the right hemisphere of your brain. This came from a book club, a local book club that we did, and the topic was visioning. And there was a woman who took notes. She said, I'll take notes. And this is what she created. And I could not believe it. I could not believe it. It was amazing. So the visioning part really means escaping your left hemisphere for a period of time and discovering the deeper flow of your unconsciousness, what your human factor is, because that's essential to the visioning part. And the visioning also requires us I was realizing that, storytelling is like really important in medicine. Why do we not see stories told in the New York Times by physicians every day? We should all be writing a story, an opinion every day in our local newspaper. When you think about the things that are happening right now, we should be responsible to be responding, because we're just natural storytellers, and we're so proximate to stories. We have the grace of being able to, the good fortune of being close to stories that we can share that can be impactful. So I was kind of struggling with what the role is of me telling a story, what the story was for myself. I just my ontologic kind of pursuit of trying to make sense out of all this. And this is kind of where I discovered relational leadership. So relational leadership is an intentional pursuit to learn more about your story of self. Pursue an individual, intentional journey to understand who you are a little bit better, and then to think about who your teammates are, and to think about that's the story of us, and how you can intersect with a system which can bring partners to make change. Because I didn't even know what change I wanted to make when this story was evolving, but I was being sensitized to these things. But I knew that I wanted to make change with Governor Ralph Northam. Governor Ralph Northam took the next job as governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Guess what his profession is? He's a neurologist. He's the only neurologist in the history of Virginia's governorship. And I thought that the stars had aligned. And Governor Northam sat on our clemency petition for 4 years. Well, 3.5 years. And in June of his final months in office, he said no. As the other Dr. Gilmer was radically declining in prison, who could barely talk, who was emaciated, who could not walk, who could not feed himself, yet he remains in this prison environment. I was very upset. Even betrayed. I felt like there was some betrayal aspect of it. And so leading up to this moment, I had been desperately seeking to write. But I was still working 60 hours a week and trying to get up in the morning to pursue like what a writing process would look like. And I didn't know what that looked like. So I went to visit Brian Stevenson to ask him what that looked like because he did a good job. And he gave me some pointers, and I was so compelled to tell the story in a way that would speak very directly to Governor Northam, and that's why I pursued writing this book, was for Governor Northam. But it hadn't been published. In June of 2021, it had not been published, and so he didn't have the opportunity to read it, and I felt guilty. I felt kind of a sense of shame in a way that it didn't happen, but it really focused me on what the story of now was. And the story of now is the story that we all pursue in terms of recognizing what is your most urgent challenge. What does your vision of successful action look like? Who are the partners that you need to bring together? So I was thinking about that. I was trying to think about who do I need? Okay, I need the Innocence Project. Who do I need? I need a high-powered law firm. It's going to cost millions of dollars. I need some journalists from the NYT and the Washington Post. Who are the partners that need to help me create some action that would enable this man to live in a hospital rather than a prison? And finally, I finished the book. And it was 6 months too late because Governor Northam had made his decision. But I sought some partners on the inside of the governor's office. And so Penguin Random House gave me boxes of books before they were published. And I took them to the governor's mansion, and I had this person distribute them everywhere. So this was the first week of December. And so Governor Northam it was just before Christmas, actually. And so Governor Northam only had a couple weeks before the end of his office. And in January, on the last day of office, he literally, like the last hours of his governorship, he granted clemency. So somebody convinced him from the inside. It was kind of a miraculous thing that those of you who haven't pursued clemency before, once a clemency is rejected, you have to wait 2 years before you can pursue another clemency appeal. And it was an unprecedented thing for it to be turned over. And so then I thought the game was over. I thought we had won. We were so grateful. The other, Dr. Gilmer, was grateful. And then I learned an even more uncomfortable story. And we had simply just asked for him to move from prison to a hospital. And I thought that would be easy. I thought my own hospital would be the recipient. I had been negotiating with the CEO of our hospital for months to make this happen. He said yes. And I thought that it would be an easy transitional process. Until our state attorney general, our current governor that I saw yesterday, mounted a suit against our hospital that had recently been bought by Hospital Corporation of America, a for-profit hospital system based in Nashville, and 60% of our doctors left. And it was a big deal. It was a really big deal. And so this was a story that was unanticipated, because at this point, our leadership decided they were not going to take the other Dr. Gilmer because they didn't need any more negative press. And they didn't understand that it could actually be very positive press. And People magazine was ready to tell that story, and they did, but not with the benefit of mission. This is where I work, accepting him. So that led me to another bridge. Like, what are we supposed to do? When we have challenges in the workplace, what is our role to speak our authentic truth? Like, what is our role to be advocates for our community? For me, it was beginning to be very clear that like this writing endeavor was something that was important to me and could actually be impactful. And it made me think about what is justice. And this is how Brian Stevenson describes it, that justice is a constant struggle. And that's what we had learned. We had learned after spending literally probably $2 million on legal fees. We had confronted 3 governors that failed. And now my own hospital would not even take him, which meant that the other Dr. Gilmer had to spend 15 months in prison as a free person. And that's one of the world records in our country, actually, for a person who's been granted clemency to remain in prison for well over a year. So I love this quote of fairness, equality, and balance. That is justice for Brian Stevenson. So finally, sort of the end of the story is that he did get out. It wasn't my hospital that took him. It was a different hospital, a smaller regional hospital, a hospital that did not have the resources to take care of him. And they took him, and we were able to transition him. And there he is in the back of our clinic. On the day of liberation, like the day we drove him from the prison to see the clinic and then straight to the hospital where the police were waiting for us to admit him. So, as we think about our path, our paths can be so wildly different, right? And, our path doesn't have to be a path towards justice. It doesn't have to be a path towards change. It could be a very personal path that you choose, but this is the one that Dr. Schweitzer describes so well, that this is really kind of the summation of what Reverence for Life was for him, that example is not the main thing in influencing others. It is the only thing. That hope is renewed each time that you see a person you know who is deeply involved in the struggle of life, helping another person. And those who are not so tied down to the struggle for existence, who are freer, must give the example of service. So I think that this is a good place to stop. I would love for us to have some questions and think about, if you want to reflect on what your personal story might be, or I guess the thing that I've learned the most from this journey is that stories are important. We were able to tell a story that ultimately led to justice, and now I'm learning that this story of mass incarceration of humans with mental illness in our country is something that we should all be talking about as physicians, and it continues to burden every state. And so, sometimes it's not easy to understand the story of us. And the story of us is often very, very siloed, and so that's sort of where I'm stuck right now too, is trying to decipher like what is my role in this, what is the next story that I can tell, how does that influence people, how could this story be used to influence others? I mean, the book has been a great way to meet people like you, like to tell a story that might influence your educational pathway or a career in family medicine, because we need that. 80,000 deficit in physicians in primary care by 2030. Our rural America needs all of you, but they also need our stories too. And if you ever go to the National Rural Health Association conference, it's an amalgam of storytelling, like the whole week, and it's a beautiful experience to hear the stories of others. So let's love to hear some of your stories or questions if you have any.
I just want to make an observation as an ethicist. Your example of what do we do when we see something's wrong calls upon what Aristotle called moral courage, which is the first of virtues. Because if you don't act when you see something's wrong, you're not going to live all other virtues or employ principles to solve the situation. So I would applaud you first, maybe without your knowing it. You employed the virtue of moral courage, and that sparked your story and journey. And I bet it impacts others in the room.
Well, I think it's a great reminder to all of us that the moral courage is, I mean, we all have moral courage. I mean, Schweitzer had some issues with Aristotle, actually, and he believed that the human mind was fallible and that we needed extra help to remind us of the moral courage. Like that's, I've thought about that a lot during this was a 13-year process to get to this moment. And, there were many moments where we all thought we were defeated and were ready to quit. And I think having this backdrop for Schweitzer, for me, was the moral courage was a motivating factor. And that was Schweitzer's whole goal. I mean, Schweitzer's goal was he wanted his life to be his argument. That was one of his personal mantras. And so he stayed true to that throughout his career. And sometimes it's hard to adhere to that. Yeah, difficult times. Other thoughts? What are the stories that you're telling these days?
So,
Another philosopher in the front row?
I'm very attracted to the whole story about storytelling and its attractiveness. But I'm wondering if there's a dark side of it too. So it seems to me, for instance, that many people tell stories as a way of engaging in self-deception and also along the way deceiving other people about themselves. So that's one possibility, right? That's another type of storytelling, which has lots of the same characteristics, but a different sort of valence in terms of whether you would approve, like it or not. And then I'm wondering also in the case of, let's call it good storytelling that we find attractive and we wish people would do it more, but the extent to which it's done as a type of manipulation and whether one can slip from telling a story which ought to be told to getting used to telling stories because there's an attraction to manipulating people by telling the story. So
Yeah.
just these different sorts of ways in which storytelling, which can be cast as entirely a good thing, may in some cases not be.
Did everybody hear this? Yeah. So thank you for bringing this concept up. So this is an important, especially today, this is very important. The left brain, it turns out, is very interested in our survival. And it does everything it can to enable us to get through our daily tasks, to make very complicated decisions, to survive. This is the essence. If we didn't have that architecture of the left brain to help us do that, it's also the center that helps to tell our story of self. Our left brain is always telling us who we are. The right brain tries to do that too. It puts its labels on that, but the left brain is, in this contemporary world that we live in, is the more dominant for most people, and it often lies to us. And so there's a sense of cognitive fallibility that all of us share, which I write about in the book, because I think it's important when you think about the roots of mental illness, you have to also examine the roots of our cognitive vulnerability or fallibility. And so, what is the truth? Like, is it the right brain truth, the left brain truth? Is it the truth that we believe? Because you really shouldn't believe everything you think, right? Like that's a mistake. Which is why the story of us becomes more important, I think, to have an adherence to a truth that's spread in your community, that helps you to continue to do inquiry towards your own mind, that's creating this constant story, because the stories we tell are iterative, they're constantly evolving. And I wonder sometimes too, like if you haven't stopped and thought, okay, is this thought for real? Like is this thought the truth, or where did this come from? That's why inquiry is so important. Intentional inquiry is essential.
I take it that the dark side of storytelling is a part of this story as well, because there was a story told during the trial. right? And you believe that that story led to this grave injustice. And so the only thing that can combat a bad story, a story that leads to a bad outcome, is a better story, right? That's how we communicate with one another. It's how we connect with one another. It's how we determine what the truth is, right? And so, of course, there can be bad stories, but the only thing that you can fight them with, right, is the better story, the one that gets you closer to the truth, the one that gets you closer to justice, the one that gets you closer to connection.
So is the better story always the more effective story? There's two ways of being better. One is more truthful, one is more effective.
Oh, yeah, obviously not always the most effective
Well,
story.
you have to know who your audience is. Like, what is the story? Like, when I was talking to Mike Johnson, I had to be very careful about the story that I wanted him to understand. I wanted him to appreciate that, you know, Medicaid expansion in North Carolina was essential. That this community did not have a clinic because we did not expand Medicaid in our state until very late in the game, and that was why we were there. That was why that community was. But how do you tell a story that he could receive well, that I could tell well, those 6 things? Like, there's so much nuance in that.
I don't think from my perspective, storytelling is just a powerful tool.
Yeah.
It's not good, it's not bad, it's just a powerful tool to communicate with other human beings.
Yeah.
And you can use it the same way a knife can be used for surgery or to kill someone. I mean, it's just a powerful tool, and it's not inherently good, it just is a tool.
Thank you for that.
When you think about crime and punishment in our country, we are a fairly punitive society. And we don't like to hear excuses or explanations for bad or dangerous behavior. And didn't you run into that in the book when people thought that the other Dr. Gilmer might even be acting like a crazy person rather than everyone accepting the fact that he was just guilty and that was the end of the story?
Well, everyone thought that he was just crazy when it happened. I mean, from the legal perspective, but so this is I love this question because when you think about punishment and crime, like the most important concept for me in this book was healing crime and how to reframe crime and punishment in a different way. And I was trying just to provide a purely like clinical example, like through the lens of a physician, what does punishment look like? What does healing crime look like? And we all know what that means. It means going far upstream to kindergarten and creating a better education system. Like that's what it means. But it also means a reframe that I've been so surprised that the judges that I've spoken to have a very they don't have a very deep understanding sometimes about what mental health is and the roots of mental health, and that we shouldn't punish people with our most vulnerable citizens, that we shouldn't punish them. Like that understanding, because we have this deep understanding since slavery that we should just punish people. And that is the truth that I was trying to bend through a very clinical perspective, was that we can heal rather than just punish.
Well, that's the human factor of it.
That's the human factor.
The human factor is that mental health is very treatable. This tragedy that we have so much untreated mental health in our penal system. And so it's not as black and white as crime and punishment or punishing. We need to bridge that gap. We're all doctors in this room of all different kinds of specialties and scientists, and we need to bridge that gap. It's a societal problem, and we actually have a solution for the mental health issue. I knew it was coming. I was like, where are you gonna put this man when he gets out of the prison? Because on Kansas City, we don't have a big prison, and we certainly don't have a great connection to mental health. But in the community we do. And interprofessionally, we work very hard between social work, the legal office, the head of fire, the head of police, and a number of social workers, case managers, emergency physicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, pharmacists to address the mental health issues, which may hopefully mean that's why we don't have a big prison, is that we are effectively working on treating that mental health issue. And so that I think is the key here, is we are the solution. Mental health in a lot of ways is very treatable. Schizophrenia is funded, well, not lately, sorry. But mental health issues can be treated, and this is the group of people who care enough to treat them. And so we have to bridge that gap. And you did beautifully with the story.
And tell the stories of success.
Yes.
There are many stories of success like yours. I mean, the fact that you have nearly 60% of your medical students who are doing primary care. Bravo.
Stephanie, do you think that most medical students, most residents of a variety of specialties actually know much, let alone a little, about the penal system and healthcare within it?
No.
It's a gap.
It's a gap.
It's not being addressed in medical education. And that's one of the reasons I asked Dr. Gilmer to come. The other is his mother's a friend of mine. Mary Jo Gilmer, PhD,
the other
nursing faculty.
She's the other.
There's the other Dr. Gilmer, that's right. And so I'm fond of Mary Jo and happy to have had Deb. No, but it was this very gap that I read the book, and we don't know about this stuff. We don't teach this stuff, and yet life is going on. Punitive actions are taken every day. People with mental health disorders are not being treated. They're being closeted in large penal facilities, or they're turned back on the street and don't get the care that they need. Your social construct, your interdisciplinary construct is exceptional. But I imagine even here in Kansas City, where we have 3 medical schools, most don't know anything about this. I came to this and my eyes were open. I was shocked. But then that's where the curiosity chain starts.
Yes, and envision.
And so advocacy
Inquiry.
at the end of the trail.
Transformation.
A great vision, transformation, advocacy.
Dr. Gilbert, the hour is closed, but I'm sure people will be happy to stay and speak with you and discuss things. There's some light lunch food out there, if I'm not mistaken. And thank you all for attending and supporting this lectureship. Dr. Gilbert, thank you.
One more thing, so there are, I ordered 24 books, Rainy Day Books, my favorite bookstore in town. If you just go and tell them that you came here, they'll give you a free one. And maybe we could do like a virtual book club or something.
Yeah, show them your ID badge when you go to Rainy Day Books, so
Yeah.
they don't think you're fabricating a story.
Free book, yeah.
Various reasons.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy the day, people. Yeah.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Let's see, how do we get this thing back? Let's see.